right, so it's middle ground. It's Carlos Curbelo. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you, Seth. I mean, we're in the middle of the Democratic primary, so it's not time for middle ground, but, let's do it anyway.
Well, so that, I guess, this year, we're going to try to kind of focus in on what somebody running for office, no matter the office, would be thinking about. We'll leave presidential politics aside. Plenty of people are on that one. And maybe we can get to where there could be middle ground. But the work at hand for somebody that's running for Congress, U.S. Congress, as the year gets going here, I know I've been seeing these presidential candidates going for over a year, I guess, with the exception of if you're a billionaire, you can join whenever you want. Right?
You can be late to the party.
There we go. But if you're running for Congress, why am I just reading that, kind of campaigns are just getting going?
Well, in part because of the Democratic primary, it's just sucked up all the oxygen. The other part of the equation is because we have a president that also demands a lot of attention. Some people would say commands a lot of attention and doesn't leave a lot of room for races for the U.S. Senate, for the U.S. House. Everyone's talking about the president every day and what he did and how congressional leaders, Democrats specifically, are reacting to that. Obviously, impeachment for a few weeks dominated all of the political conversation. So I'll just say, having represented a swing district, having been a centrist member who worked very hard to build my own brand and just kind of distinguish myself from both parties, this is as difficult as it gets because there's so much noise, so much chaos that it's tough to break through. So that's why we're so late in the cycle. And now we're starting to hear about some of these competitive House races, even more so about the competitive Senate races, because they could change the balance of power in the Senate. But it's just a tough environment for anyone, right? If you're a Republican, how do you break out of the whole Trump narrative? If you're a Democrat, how do you break out of the anti-Trump narrative? It's very tough. It'll take a lot of money and it'll take a lot of effort.
So that's interesting. So because of the noise, no matter what it is, it's going to be difficult to talk about issues, let alone specific races. Just kind of educate us as to, in these first few months, what is my campaign doing if I'm running for Congress, right? So if there is all this noise, okay, fine, I'm dealing with that. But what are the machinations? What are the logistics?
Well, if you're a House member, you've been raising money since the day after you got elected, which is just terrible, but I had to do it, and they all have to do it if they're in competitive races. And you're still raising money today, and you will still be raising money up until 2 or 3 days before your election. So that's the heaviest cross that anyone has to carry in politics. Senators, yeah, they can afford to take a year, maybe 2 years off, but they've been raising money for quite some time as well. Here's the other big concern that members have right now, and a lot of people probably aren't aware of this: primaries. The greatest fear for any member of Congress today is getting primaried and defeated. Joe Crowley, New York.
Yep.
Surprise attack from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. 20-year career in the House comes to an abrupt halt. There are some Republicans who, over the last decade, have suffered the same fate. So that is the top concern for members. That's in part psychological. No one wants to lose at all, but really, especially, no one wants to lose to someone from their own team, because basically a primary campaign against an incumbent is, this person's not cool enough. This person isn't loyal to our principles.
He's not us.
It's
he's
very
not
personal.
Us.
Exactly. It's very personal. General election, you're getting attacked by the other side. People are comfortable with that. Maybe they shouldn't be, right? Maybe maybe they should try to minimize that and show how they try to work with the other side.
Hmm.
But it's just easier to, you know, to not get hit by friendly fire. So those are the two, money and primaries. In February of an election year, those are the two things members are thinking about. Primary season's about to kick off. I think Texas is first in March, and then we'll have primaries all the way through September. Massachusetts has a big primary. I think they're the last state. Joe Kennedy going against Merkley, Markey or Merkley. There's two in the Senate, but anyway, the incumbent from Massachusetts. So it's a big deal. That might mean Joe Kennedy has an advantage considering I can remember his name. So, but I certainly
Right,
so that's
exactly, and you were there on Capitol Hill, one side of it, but still. So what I'm hearing from you is that early on, I'm taken out of any kind of middle ground that I would be in. Perhaps I'm taken out of the opportunity to have my my pet issue if it doesn't read to the kind of more left or more right. So from day one that I'm raising money, which is the day after I get elected, I'm all the way kind of politicized either way. And if I have to raise money up until a couple days before the election, there's only 2 days that I could stake out my middle ground. And none of those are really when I'm governing or providing governance to the U.S. And so,
people don't have to take your word for it or mine.
right.
Look at what happened with impeachment. In the House, there were two members who decided to break with their parties.
Yeah.
Justin Amash was a Republican. Today he is an independent.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff Van Drew was a Democrat. Today he's a Republican.
Right.
That is the cost of opposing your party these days. You have to leave.
Yeah.
And Mitt Romney's not leaving, but if the president had his way, he'd kick him out.
Sure.
And
Mitt Romney only halfway voted against, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Now I'll tell you this: if we were past primary season, votes might be a little different. Because again, the greatest fear is, not only it's not just that I'm worried about getting defeated if I break, I will be defeated, so I have to leave.
Yeah,
a high cost.
Totally understood, and I mean, I understand who I'm talking to, who's telling me that. So from early days here, all the way through September, that's all primary season, as far as we're concerned.
Well, yeah, it varies by state, and obviously the earlier the members prefer earlier primaries because then they can kind of be themselves after the primary. They
but then
to worry about. They only have one race to worry about as opposed to two, and they no longer have to worry about people from their side, right? And
but the entire House can't vote collectively throughout that expanse.
Right, and what a lot of members will go to the leadership and say, hey, please don't bring this vote up now because it could become a primary issue for me. So everything, there's punting and punting and punting, and this huge agenda builds up, and then there's not enough time to do it. And then there are other excuses like, hey, this is politically sensitive for other reasons, please don't bring it up. Anyway, the biggest problem, Seth, is that everyone wants to get reelected, and that's their highest priority.
Which brings
if it wasn't, they wouldn't care, and they would just do whatever they believe is best.
Which brings up, I'm sorry for talking over you because I'm excited because I'm about to bring up cannabis, right? So that's what brings up cannabis, because now if you talk to anybody in the industry, what they'll tell you, with not necessarily any real insight, is, well, one side's going to take this up and use it, right? So that, before the election, they're going to take up legal cannabis and it's going to be their issue so that the other side doesn't have it. How feasible is that viewpoint? And I think we're now mostly talking about the Senate, because we would get a vote maybe on the States Act. We maybe would get a vote probably more so on safe banking. What are your thoughts on this issue coming up before the election to be used against the other party?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence that this issue has become a topic of consensus. Now, not unanimous agreement, but certainly consensus. It's not being used to attack members. 91 Republicans, these days it's Republicans who would be most sensitive to cannabis attacks from the right, from extreme conservatives. 91 of them in the House, all before their primaries, voted for cannabis reform legislation. They went on the record and they justified this position to colleagues who maybe had some questions about that or were unhappy about that. The Republican leader in the House gave a lot of cover to members because he voted for the legislation. So the fact that cannabis is not being discussed a lot in the context of primary elections is actually wonderful news, because that means it's not a sharp weapon anymore in a negative sense. And
so we'll take that win, basically.
Oh, that's a
right?
big win. And then, if anything, in the Democratic presidential primary, we did see some attacks, but on the other side, Vice President Biden was attacked by Senator Booker for being out of touch on cannabis reform. So we're seeing the attacks on the non-restrictive side of the equation. And to the extent there are attacks, for a more restrictive policy, you really, they're not loud and they're not powerful. And that means that we're in a much better place.
In primary season, if primary season ends in September, that means that we could vote in the Senate in October for one of these pieces of legislation. I'm going to bring it up now, and then we'll continue to bring it up throughout the year. What is the viability of that happening? That's what the industry speak is. Does that hold any water?
Look, the SAFE Act, which is the banking reform bill, I think is very much in play.
For a vote in 2020?
For a vote in 2020.
Okay.
We shouldn't assume that it's a slam dunk, okay?
Right.
Why? Because we just went through impeachment.
Yeah.
There's not a spirit of cooperation in the Capitol these days. Democrats,
as we just said, Mitt Romney doesn't even agree with himself, right?
Democrats are angry. They feel, and with good reason, that the president has been emboldened and is being even more aggressive with regards to taking controversial action. Republicans feel that, especially in the House, that Democrats ran a very closed process where they didn't have the opportunities they felt they deserved. And by the way, I'm not making any value judgments. This is just how people feel. Our viewers could have their own opinions, and I respect all opinions on this issue, but this is just the mood. So how do you get big things done in that environment? It's difficult. The only real chance will be as part of must pass bills. So either an appropriations package or something else, some program that's expiring, an extension of the Highway Trust Fund, which they may have to do. Those are the opportunities. I wouldn't expect a standalone vote in the Senate. I just don't know that there's enough agreement, trust, or time to get that done. The Senate was occupied with impeachment for a few weeks. We know that for Mitch McConnell, getting judicial appointments ratified is the top priority. He doesn't think there's very much he can do with Nancy Pelosi in terms of legislation, so he's focused on areas where the Senate doesn't have to rely on the House, and that's ratifying nominations. So it's going to be difficult. It will take a must-pass vehicle and allowing cannabis reform legislation to ride on that. We know Cory Gardner is working very hard on this. And of course, many Democrats are as well, but Republicans control the chamber. Gardner is the key component of anything passing or not. He's already moved the needle. The fact that Senator Crapo even is willing to propose a bill and have a markup potentially, it wouldn't happen, but for Cory Gardner. So there's a chance. Still, we have to be realistic and understand we are probably in the worst political environment since Watergate. So don't count any chickens.
And even during Watergate, you and I are basically the same age, so that was not our time.
And more importantly, we're both very youthful in our disposition.
Absolutely. Everything that I've read about Watergate, everything that I've seen about Watergate, it feels like it was a different place. Washington, D.C. was a different place. So when you say it's the worst political environment since Watergate, it feels like this political environment is actually worse than.
I would say it is, because with Watergate, we actually had a really good reason to be at odds with each other. I mean, of course, we just went through impeachment, and Democrats, I think, were correct to at the very least raise serious questions and investigate what happened with Ukraine. But even before that scandal, we were in a very bad position.
Sure.
Really, there was no crime committed. And I'm not talking, it's not just Trump. Like, going back to the Obama years, we were in a really bad position, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And it's not like we had this national crisis or some event that provoked that. People have just become more and more radicalized and hardened in their views and in their attitudes over time.
Totally.
But we've kind of done it to ourselves. Watergate, it was Richard Nixon's fault. People committed a crime. He covered it up. You've caused this crisis. Our country's divided. People are angry. We have a major crisis, and there's an obvious culprit. Now there's a major crisis, and kind of like, why? What? The economy's going well. We're not. I mean, we're always at war, but we're not engaged in a horrible conflict like Vietnam or like, why are we getting along? Why are we trying to do good things for the country?
Well, I point to our leaders not helping. I would imagine with the dialogue. I would point to the fourth estate
at the top.
Yeah. The fourth estate not helping out as far as kumbaya. Folks will see that you've got an elephant on your wall. I've got a map of the world. I'm a human from Earth, so I come to
a very nice elephant. This elephant is not violent. It just wants to get along with all animals, including donkeys,
including mice. When you say that a crime wasn't committed, I hear you. I take your point, and I've seen the video of Joe Biden saying that he withheld the funds in Ukraine, and there is the distinction of why he withheld the funds. But essentially, they both did it. I'm happy to play that game. But what I don't love is the construct of bringing other nations into our political
Listen,
elections.
Don't get me wrong.
If that's not a crime, I'm still going to have issue with it. Does that make sense?
Don't get me wrong. And my track record on all things Trump. What the president did was wrong.
Yeah.
Democrats were more than justified in launching an inquiry because this had to be investigated.
I got you. But if you know that McConnell's not going to even do
it make sense to put the country through impeachment with an election right around the corner? Now, this was second term. Hey, okay, we have no accountability mechanisms left. This is the only one. But an election is a fairly powerful, trust me, I know, a very, very powerful accountability mechanism. And I do think that it would have been better, whether anyone thinks the president should have been removed from office or not. And I think there's room for both points of view. Whether it was worth putting the country through the exercise, I think that's a much tougher question. So I would probably say it wasn't worth
So let's actually do this, because you're talking about essentially, as we heard ad nauseum, impeachment is a political exercise. So if you are Speaker Curbelo, what you're saying is, why would I do impeachment? That's going to alienate the other side. If I censure right now, then at least I can get some, bipartisanship here, wrap them on the wrists, tell them we're paying attention to them, because that's what the intention was anyway through impeachment. We're not going to come completely at odds in the Senate with that type of thing. And then we can have a collective conversation, as opposed to, we're going to vote one way, we're going to vote the other. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
You just, in life, but especially in politics, you have to be aware of your circumstances.
Yeah.
This case was not a slam dunk case. Why? Because impeachment is ultimately a political exercise. I know it looks like a legal proceeding, but it's not. Okay, it's not a court. Sure, the Chief Justice presides. As we saw, he's completely powerless. He was just there because the Constitution says he has to be there, and he can't really intervene in a meaningful way, except one time to say, be nice to each other. That was the extent of his involvement in this case. So, Speaker Pelosi, I think, had a unique opportunity to say, look, what the president did was wrong. There are very few people, even in the House, out there saying that what he did was perfect, as he says.
Right.
We've gone through this investigation. Right. We've put out all the facts. The American people know now what happened. Yeah. More facts will come out because the administration is blocking testimony, information. That will come out over time. Let's let the American people be the jury. In the meantime, I'm going to try to bring the Congress together and show that we all agree, even our Republican colleagues, that what the president did was wrong. Yeah. And that we should, as an institution, make a statement with regards to that. And that would have put a lot of Republicans in a very tough position. Now, impeachment, it was easy for them because half the country, meaning pretty much every single Republican and Republican-leaning independents, didn't want the president to be removed from office. So that was an easy vote for them. Hey, everyone who supports me doesn't want. Now, 70% of the country thinks the president did something wrong, but they were never asked that question.
Yeah,
and they were never asked that question. And now, if I'm Speaker Pelosi, I say, okay, you're going to vote against the censure resolution. So you think what he did was fine. Now you're against 70% of the country, which includes a lot of your own supporters.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I think that was offered to we the people for impeachment was she had a bunch of very loud voices in her caucus that were demanding it. And so essentially Speaker Curbelo would say, I get you, I hear you, I understand what you're saying, but if we play it this way, this is what's going to happen. I'm suggesting, if you would, please come along with me, because if we do it this way, it's way better for us. It's way tougher for them.
That requires leadership. And by the way, I saw this movie over and over again with John Boehner and Paul Ryan, where what decision am I going to make? And am I going to let 35 members drive an entire process and lock out not just the other party, forget about the other party, most of my own party, including the most vulnerable members who are saying, please don't impeach. That's not good for me in my district. I'm being attacked for having gone to Washington just to impeach the president. And that's not why I came to Washington. I think what he did was wrong. I'll condemn it, but don't do this.
So then why, here's the last question, right? For this one. Why then does each party keep making decisions which seem like the easier way out for the other side? In other words, by going hard right with, back in your days there, made it easier on the left. By going hard left, it makes it easier on the right. Why are we doing that?
For most leaders, And by the way, I respect all these people. Paul Ryan,
and you've
John
said,
Boehner,
absolutely.
Nancy Pelosi. I've had dinner with her. I
Yeah.
get along with her. No problem. For most of these leaders, for most members of Congress, the greatest motivator is not courage, but fear.
Mm.
These 30, 35, 40 members in my caucus, they are the most emboldened. They are willing to be more aggressive than anyone else. They will threaten to vote for someone else for speaker, and some of them will do it. And
Right.
I saw this. Republicans
Right.
who defected and voted for not John Boehner and even Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
I think he lost 6 votes on the floor. People don't want to lose. John Boehner eventually got sick of that, and he started bringing bills to the floor that did not have a lot of support among Republicans, but that he believed the country needed. Like, we needed to fund the government. I'm sorry, I know you're against it, but we just have to do it.
Right.
And he made a decision, and I admire him very much. He said, I'm gonna go ahead and do these things, but I'm gonna have to leave because I'm gonna lose too much support.
Yeah.
But he literally put the country over his position.
Right.
And you talk to John Boehner today, he's thrilled with life, and
you're talking about kind of that last year or so, where he's just like, okay, you know what we're doing? This is what.
Yeah. He told me the story. I'm not going to get into too much detail because I don't know if he's said this publicly, but he was going to bring forward a bill. A group of members came in and said, if you do this, we're essentially going to remove you. They're going to file it's called a motion to vacate the chair. And he said, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'm leaving, but I'm going to do this.
Right.
And I'm going to do a number of other things. We reauthorized the Export-Import Bank, which was a discharge petition that he allowed. We passed a number of bills that were just important to the country, needed to get done. And John Boehner sacrificed his power to advance those causes. And can you say anything better about anyone in public office than that?
Yeah, but again,
or is it better to say they held on to power for as long as possible?
Right.
Come on.
With whatever kind of hammer, a velvet hammer or otherwise, right? So hat tip to the past. But I take your point here that we can get things done if we just say, you know what, I'm going to get something done, and I promise you I will leave, and that's how I'm going to get it done. So that's an interesting.
And you know what? Maybe you don't have to leave. Maybe you do great things, and people say, you know what, this kind of feels good. You can stay.
Yeah. Let's keep that conversation going. These are always fantastic, and we can see that these are much more charged. We talked about guns last time, and this one had more emotion in it. How is that possible?
It just gives you an idea from someone who lived it and saw it and knows exactly what's going on.
That's it.
How tough it is. And you know what? I admire every member for being willing to sit through this, because it's not fun.
Right. Yeah, no, you can see that it's not fun. It's amazing. All right, Carlos, thank you so much. I cannot wait for next time.
Good talking, my friend. You all.